Hello, everyone. Thank you again, Bante, for letting me give a talk. This one was planned out, so I prepared something. So today is Vesak, and that is for the birth of the Buddha, or Prinsiddhartha, I should say, the Bodhisattva, the enlightenment, awakening, and the Nibbāna of the Buddha. And luckily, I've had some amazing teachers, like Most Venerable Bhante Kolita, and Most Venerable Bhante Siniwaza, and the one I learned a lot from in a new perspective was Most Venerable Bhante Punnaji. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Most Venerable Bhante Punnaji. And he taught me the Dhamma from a pretty radical perspective, where Bhante Punnaji had a PhD in world religion, philosophy, and psychology. And so, because of that, he had a very unique way of discussing the Dhamma. And particularly, since today is Vesak, and the important thing of the life of the Buddha is that he attained Nibbāna, and he also taught us how to attain Nibbāna. So when speaking about Nibbāna, some people call it Nirvana. You use the Sanskrit, but here we use the Pali, Nibbāna. There will be some people that say that you can't really describe Nibbāna. But as we all know, when we chant the salutation to the Dhamma, we say Suakato Bhagavata Dhammo. The teachings of the Buddha are well expressed in words. And so I learned 4 ways that we can discuss Nibbāna from 4 different perspectives. The first way that we can discuss Nibbāna is from the perspective of evolution. So I had mentioned earlier that I come from a Mexican heritage, and my family was Catholic, and we discuss a lot of the other religions. The religious views don't really match or are harmonious with the theory of evolution. But what I found in Buddhism that's amazing is that there's no conflict. There's no conflict between evolution and the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. And so what do I mean about Nibbāna from an evolutionary standpoint? So I'm sure a lot of the kids are going to be learning about evolution sometime in their schooling career. But when we talk about life, life can be described as an activity that started millions and millions of years ago when there was a special molecule. A molecule is made up of different atoms, but there was a special molecule that we call the DNA and RNA molecule. And this special molecule was very unique compared to everything else because it was able to get atoms from the surrounding environment and absorb them. And every time it absorbed them, it would create new molecules. And that's how life started. There's something called anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism is the building up process, and catabolism is the breaking down process. And that's what life is actually. It's a building up process and a breaking down process. Every time a molecule was destroyed, it released energy that created new molecules. And then those molecules got destroyed and released energy and created new molecules. And this is what life is. It's a constant building up and breaking down. And we call it metabolism. So that's how life started, when these special molecules started to be able to absorb atoms from its surroundings. And it didn't do this consciously. There was no consciousness in these molecules that decided to do this. It was due to the presence of the necessary conditions. And then, so those molecules started building up, and they created, the next thing was cell. There was like the single cell organism, and those cells were a collection of molecules. And then, as it got more and more complicated, as life kept evolving, the cells started getting together and created what is called cell tissue. Cell tissue, like the skin is made up of cell tissue, and organs are made up of cell tissues. So the next thing, when cell tissue started getting together, it created organs. Organs like the eyes are organs, the bladder is an organ. We have organs all over the body. And then when the organs got together, started working together, it created systems, like the respiratory system, like the circulatory system, like the many systems in the body that are a collection of different organs that all work to do something. And then when these systems got more complicated, it created organisms. And organism is just a collection of different systems. And we can discuss an organism kind of like a machine. It's just that we're a biological machine. So as life started to evolve more and more, it started in the oceans, and then it came onto land, and then at a certain point, it got more complicated, and then we got what are called mammals. During the time of the dinosaurs, the mammals were very small. Asteroid, this is what we've heard. We don't know for sure, but this is what we've heard. An asteroid hit the Earth in the Yucatan Peninsula and caused a huge change in the environment that killed off a lot of the big animals, which were the dinosaurs. And then that allowed the mammals, the little mammals that were able to hide, to come out. And they started to evolve. And then, when the mammals started to evolve and get more complicated, at a certain point, there was, the primates. The primates. And certain primates started walking upright, because they say that they had to walk upright so they can see on the grasslands that were tall, so they could see. They could see predators, they could move around. They also got very good eyesight, eyes that can see colors, different colors. Why did they have to evolve to see different colors? So that they can see the fruits in the trees. The fruits they're bright. The fruits are very bright, and they want to be seen because the fruit of the trees, when you eat the fruit and you poop out the seeds, it grows more fruits. So that's how the trees actually procreate. That's how they pass on their genes, by having their fruit get eaten, and then you defecate, and then more trees come out. So these are just little examples of how everything is due to the presence of necessary conditions. There's no God that is making sure everything goes according to plan. That's a type of thinking that people create when they don't understand reality. But the Buddha, he taught us the Dhamma, and the Dhamma is based on something called determinism. And a lot of times when we say determinism, people think about predeterminism, where there is a God that planned everything out, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about determinism, meaning everything is determined based on the conditions that are present, that are necessary. For example, even in the sutras, the Buddha talked about what happens if you get a wet, sappy stick that was in the mud, and you get another wet, sappy stick, and you try to rub them together to get fire. Is that conducive to create a flame? And he said, no, those conditions are not proper for a flame to come about. You'll need a very dry stick and a dry environment. You'll need the friction and the smoke, and that creates the fire. So this is the way the Buddha taught Dhamma. He understood this one thing called determinism. And actually, this is what the scientists now understand. This is what they follow. They know that when it rains, it's not because God is angry and throwing thunder and water and lightning. No, it's because of the conditions that we get these situations. So here, when the primate evolved, at a certain point about 5 million years ago, a type of human that was walking, or not a human, but a type of hominid that was walking upright, evolved, and there was a series of hominids that led up to what we call the human being, the Homo sapien, which is about, we can say, 140,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago. There's no real agreement, and that's our guess. But the thing that changed for the human is that what right now, we are humans, we're also animals, but the animal is called the human being, the Homo sapien. Homo means for walking upright, and sapien for conscious. The conscious, we can say the conscious ape. And the thing that changed between a human being and the other apes is that we grew a much bigger brain on the outer edge of the brain, which we call the cerebral cortex. But up to this point, up to the human being, evolution was happening unconsciously. It was happening unconsciously. No one was planning it out. It was all directed by the instinct to survive, because evolution is about survival, what they say, survival of the fittest, and the struggle to exist. And so they were just passing on genes unconsciously. The animals are doing this all unconsciously. They're not thinking. They're just doing it based on the mechanisms in the body. But once we got to the human being, we got this ability to think and to reason out. And when you look at a brain of a primate and look at a brain of a human being, they see that the biggest parts of the brain that changed were the front of the brain, where you can think, you can tell stories, you can remember, you can think about yourself. These are the things that evolved into the human being that separated us. Now, I said that Nirvana, Nibbāna, we can look at it from an evolutionary standpoint. Why? I know that a lot of people have heard that the Buddha said that the only state that one can become a Buddha is the human being, the state of the human being. And the most popular reason that we say this is because people say, well, and if you're born in the hells or in the animal realm, there's too much suffering, so you can't awaken. And then they'll say, if you're born in the heavens, there's too much pleasure, so that you can't awaken. And so we use this reasoning to think, oh yeah, that's why the Buddha said that the human being is where you can become a Buddha. Because we're all very blessed to have attained this human state, because we have the ability to think and to gather and to penetrate and analyze the Dhamma that was taught. Here, the Sama Sambuddha Gautama, 2,500 years ago, he was talking, speaking, teaching people who went up to him, and he had a discourse. And 2,500 years later, we're still able to dissect the teachings, learn, and preach to others. Well, what I understand is that the reason the human being can attain the state of Buddhahood is because we have this ability to think. Now, if all the other animals are always led by their emotions, this is how they decide to survive. And when we think about the Four Noble Truths, the four supernormal realities, the Buddha said, what is the cause of suffering? He said, it's tanha. And tanha normally is translated as craving, as desire, as thirst. But here, if we look at it from a scientific perspective, from a psychological perspective, from a biological perspective, tanha is the emotional arousal, the emotional disturbance. So tanha here means emotion. And the Buddha used the word tanha, which is related to the word thirst, because when the body, with the organism, when you guys feel thirst, it's not that you think, oh, I'm thirsty, let me drink water. You're not choosing it. The body naturally can sense, oh, there's too much sodium in the body, we need water to dilute it. Or if you were working out and running and sweating and hot, the body naturally sees the condition and says, oh, we need water. Let's trigger the sensation of thirst. And then that triggers the human being to think, oh, I'm thirsty, let me get some water. But it wasn't the human being that decided this, it was just the presence of the necessary conditions. It was mechanical. And this is why the Buddha used tanha, which is similar to thirst, to talk about emotion. Because emotions are not something you create. When we are angry, you're not deciding, I'm going to get angry now. That seems like the right thing to do. No, it happens automatically. And by the time you become conscious, oh, there's anger that has arisen, it's already too late. It's already happened. And so the first way of talking about nirvana, which is an evolutionary perspective, is because at the human being, now we have the ability to think and to reason out, and that means that we don't need emotion to lead us anymore. We don't need the emotion to help us survive, to get food, to get shelter, to get mates, to procreate. We don't need that emotion anymore. That's actually like an old system that is not needed anymore. And that's why the human being has the ability to evolve further. So, up to this point, to the human being, evolution was happening unconsciously. It was happening by itself due to the presence of the necessary conditions. Once the human being evolved and got this outer bark of the brain called the cerebral cortex, we are able to think and reason out. Now, the thing that separates a Buddha from a human being is that a Buddha eradicated, removed, stopped all the emotional disturbances. So the Buddha here took over. He understood that this was an organism. He understood that cause of suffering is the emotion. And he knew that the way to the end of suffering is to remove the emotions completely. Nirodha, cessation. And so this is why the Buddha said that the only state that you can become a Buddha is a human being, because we have the ability to think. And because we have the ability to think, we can remove the emotional disturbance. And it's that emotional disturbance that causes the suffering. But the thing is, it's not going to happen on its own. The Buddha talked about avijja. Avijja, what is vijja? Vijja is knowledge, knowing, consciousness, fully conscious. We call the Buddha vijja charana sampanno, a fully conscious behavior. Every part of the behavior and the activity of the mind is conscious. There's no avijja anywhere. But for us, we get angry, we get sad, we get emotional. We do our best. I mean, we're all here. We all took the day off to come here and practice and spend time with the Aryas, the supernormal Bhantes. And that's because we can think. But we're not arahants yet. At least I'm speaking for myself. we have to, up to this point, we became a human being. The human being became a human unconsciously through evolution. A Buddha arose in the world, which is so rare. You know, I don't need to tell all of you, you all know, it's so rare for a Buddha to arise. So we're blessed already to be in the time that a Buddha's teachings are still going. Because at a certain point, the Dhamma is going to disappear. But right now, we still have it. Thank goodness. And a Buddha chose to develop his mind to the point where he evolved past the human being. So if we look at the suttas, there is a sutta called the Dona Sutta. For the English speakers, we were in the other room, and Venerable Bhante Sananta Vihari talked about the Dona Sutta, where the Buddha had just awakened, and he decided to go to teach the 5 ascetics who were his friends. But on the way, a person walking saw the Buddha, and he said, wow, there's something special about this being, this individual. Let me go up to him. And he said, are you a Deva? And the Buddha said, no. And he said, well, are you a Gandhava? No. Are you a Yaka? No. He said, are you a human being? And he said, no. And then he said, well, I asked you if you're a Deva, which is like an angel. Are you a Gandhava, which is like another type of celestial being? Are you a Yaka, which some people call a demon or other types of higher beings? Are you a human being? And you say no to all of them, so what are you? And I'm sure you all know, the Buddha said, I'm awake. I'm a Buddha. I'm awakened. So there he made a distinction. He's not human. He evolved past the human state. And once you attain that top level of Buddhahood, no longer do you have the emotional instinct, the emotional urge to keep coming back to life, life after life after life. Because when the Buddha awoke, he said, for many lifetimes have I been traveling through this vortex of birth and death, looking for the Creator, but it's very painful to be born again and again. And then he says, I have seen you, Creator. I have destroyed your foundation, destroyed the ridgepole. The mind has stopped creating. The emotional urge has ceased. So that's it. He told this person, he said, the emotional influences that are in a Deva, in a Gandhava, in a Yaka, in a Manusa, a human being, they're not in me. They have been destroyed. The asavas have been destroyed. So there he said he's not a human being. Right now, in the West, a lot of people will say, yeah, the Buddha is human. The Buddha is human. He's a human being. No, that's, according to Most Venerable Bhante Punjaji, he said that came, he thinks that was perpetuated by the missionaries that were missionaries from Christianity who said, yeah, the Buddha, he's human. Because they think only God is perfect. But we all know that the Buddha is an arahant, a perfected being. And he is perfect because there is no emotional influences, no asavas. So he pointed out that to evolve to the highest level, it takes a conscious evolution. Bhavana. It takes bhavana. And you have to evolve past the human being by destroying the emotional arousal. And that is Nibbāna. Nibbāna is no lobha, no dosa, no moha. Lobha is greed, lust, dosa is hate, and moha is delusion. But a Buddha, Nibbāna, is the end of those problems. We can call them problems. So that's the first level we can talk about. Nibbāna is reaching the pinnacle of evolution. So I said there was 4 ways to talk about Nibbāna. This leads into the next thing that I want to talk about. I'm sure everyone here has heard of the most famous sutra called the Kalama Sutta, the discourse he gave to the Kalamas. Actually, the sutra is called the Kesamutti Sutta, but he had the Discourse to the Kalamas, so we know it as the Kalamas Sutta. In this sutta, the people called the Kalamas, they went to the Buddha and they said, hey, there's so many people that come here and they say, this is reality, this is the truth. What everyone else says is false. I'm the only one that knows the truth, and this is it. But then we get another person who comes and says that, oh, this is the truth. What the last person said was wrong. What everyone else is going to say is wrong. That's false. This is the truth. So they asked the Buddha, how do we know what's truth? And the Buddha goes on to say many ways that you should not rely on for truth. But the special thing about this, and this is why Most Venerable Bhante Punnaji understood, because he had a PhD in philosophy, he knew that the Buddha here wasn't just saying random things that you shouldn't rely on. He actually predicted the course that the Western philosophy would take. So, the first one he said is, don't rely on tradition. You know, human beings, we live in we can call herds. We have a herd mentality. We want to live together, and a lot of us don't even want to think. We just follow what everyone else is doing. That is following tradition. Whatever the tradition is, we're going to follow. The Buddha said, don't rely on tradition. Don't rely on these old scriptures, on what is truth. So what's the second thing he said? He said, don't rely on logic, just logic. And if we think about philosophy started, in Western philosophy, at least in Greece, in about 500 to 300 BC, there was the Greek philosophers, and that's where philosophy started. They said, is it true? That's the start of philosophy. Is it true? Is it true or is it false? And to have that question, to have that doubt, is the first step to philosophy. And that's what the Greek philosophers started doing. They started using logic to try to figure out what is true and what is false. But the Buddha said, don't rely on logic to determine what is truth. And then the next thing that followed after logic is empiricism. So with empiricism, it means to observe and come up with an inference. So when we have an empirical study, we have a hypothesis, we set up the conditions, we observe, and then we see what happens. That's the scientific method. To observe and then make an inference, to come up with a conclusion based on what you saw. But the problem with that is that you're relying just on the senses, looking outside. But even if you ask any scientist, they say there is no truth with the scientific method. All there is probability. All we can talk about is what is the most probable answer. But that doesn't mean there's truth, because there was Isaac Newton who came up with the theory of gravity, because, the famous story that the apple fell down and he saw it. Well, then later, Albert Einstein came around and destroyed the idea of gravity by coming up with the theory of relativity, saying that it's not gravity, it's actually relative to the mass and the speed. That's what determines the gravitational pull. But then quantum physics came around and then destroyed relativity. So truth cannot be found with empiricism. So he says, and this is the Buddha talking 2,500 years ago, describing the way that Western philosophy was going to go. And so it went from tradition to logic to empiricism. Then some people started saying, yeah, truth is not through the senses. You can't see it through the senses. Actually, truth is transcendental, is beyond the senses. You actually have to go into the mystic jhanas to see truth. That's what people started saying. There's a famous German philosopher, his name is Immanuel Kant, and he talked about the phenomenon, which has to do with our sense experience, and he talked about the noumenon, this reality that is outside of the senses. And he said that that's the truth, but you can never know it. This is transcendentalism. They thought, well, the truth is not through empirical observation. It's actually outside of the senses. It's transcendental. But the problem with that is that later, the linguistic analytic philosopher said, no, you guys are still talking about a concept. If you're saying that you can't see it, you can't prove it through your senses, then it's just an idea you're coming up with. And it's a meaningless statement. If I say that God exists, I can't prove it. It's just a meaningless statement. It's as if I'm saying that the Easter Bunny exists. That's just a statement. So the linguistic philosophers started saying, there's only sentences, and there's meaningful sentences, and there's meaningless sentences. And the meaningful sentences are the ones that we can prove. If we can't prove it, then it's meaningless. That's what truth is, if it's a meaningful sentence. But then there was the philosophers who were called the pragmatic philosophers, and they said, no, the human organism, the nervous system, it's a problem-solving machine. The human being constantly is looking at things and trying to solve problems. So it's not a matter of whether a sentence is meaningful or meaningless. It's actually whether there's a problem and there's a solution. That's what truth is. If the solution solves the problem, then that is truth. But then, after the pragmatic philosophers, came the existentialists. And the existentialists said, you guys are wasting your time on meaningless problems. The only problem is that we're human beings. We were born. We're going to get old, sick, and their death follows. We're going to die. So the only real problem to solve is to solve this problem of birth, aging, sickness, and death. But these existential philosophers, they couldn't figure out an answer to that. They couldn't figure out how to solve that. There was a gentleman, philosopher named Kierkegaard, who was religious growing up, but then he gave up religion when he became an existential philosopher. But when he grappled with this problem of birth, aging, sickness, and death, he went ahead and said, you know what? The human being cannot solve this. We're going to have to put our hope in God. Here, he said, you have to take the leap of faith. So God can solve the problem, the human being can't solve this problem, it's too big. But here he was giving up religion, and then he couldn't figure it out, so he went back to the idea of God, that God will figure it out. But there was one existential philosopher, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He said that the human being has to evolve in order to solve this problem. Well, that's where the Buddha walks into this discussion. The Buddha was the human being that evolved past the human state. And the Buddha was the one who realized that the problem with birth, aging, sickness, and death is that you think that you exist. That existence is a delusion. There is no self here. It's anatta, selfless. It's impersonal. There is no one here that gets old, gets sick, and dies. So the Buddha in this Kalama Sutta, he lays out the whole course that Western philosophy is going to take. He predicted this. This is crazy, interesting how he predicted this so long ago. He saw where it was going to go. A lot of these philosophies, especially empiricism, started in the Age of Enlightenment, in the 1500s. They call it the Age of Enlightenment. Why? Because they stopped relying on the idea of God, and they started using their thinking to look at everything from a deterministic standpoint. to see what are the conditions that lead to these occurrences. So, the Buddha awakened. Some people call it enlightenment, some people call it awaken. But it's interesting. He saw this determinism. And he didn't use this understanding, this comprehension, this panya, this wisdom. He didn't use this to create air conditioners, to create speakers. He used this to look at the mind, look at the conditions, see what the problem, what was the cause of suffering, and to eliminate that condition that's causing suffering. And he came up with the idea he realized the reality that there is no existence possible. The universe is a dynamic activity, and no static entity can exist in a dynamic reality. So, what did he tell the Kalamas? So the Kalamas asked him, how do we know what truth is if everyone is saying something else? Here we just went through the course of Western philosophy, each one saying the last one was wrong. And then, what did the Buddha say to the Kalamas? The Buddha said, if you can see for yourself that something is good, that it brings happiness, and that it is wise, then you should follow through with that as truth. That's what you should do. So, these three things. Is it good? Is it happy? Does it bring happiness? And is it wise? So, there was this psychologist, Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, they call him the father of psychology. He was one of the first psychologists to start using introspection, to look inside. And that's very special because actually introspection is what we call satipatthana. Most people call satipatthana mindfulness, but we're not filling the mind with anything. We're not trying to fill the mind. So mindfulness is not a proper translation. We're actually looking inside. Sati Upatthana. Sati means attention, upa means inside, and tana is to place the attention. Place the attention inside. And here Sigmund Freud, he used introspection. And what is he famous for? He has something called the structural model of the mind, the structural model of personality. And he talked about three things. The id, the ego, and the superego. So when he used the word id, it literally means the English word it, it. When I point at something, we say it. It is hot, it is raining, it is a flower, it is a Buddha statue, it. And we use the word it because it doesn't have a gender. It's not him or he. We don't say the flower is a he or a she. It's an it. It doesn't have a gender. It's inanimate. It's inanimate. So when he talked about the id, he talked about the id is the emotions in the mental activity. And he said that these emotions are unconscious. They don't think. They don't have the ability to think or reason. The emotions are unconscious. They're blind. And he said that the id follows the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle is constantly looking for pleasure and constantly avoiding pain. A lust for pleasure and a hatred of pain. That's the principle that dictates what the id does. id. And then he talked about the ego. The ego he called the thinking. Why did he call it the ego? Because there was a French philosopher named René Descartes. And René Descartes was at least very smart in that he decided to doubt everything. He said, what is reality if I start from a place where I doubt everything? And he thought, if I doubt everything I've ever been told, if I doubt it, the only thing that I'm sure of is that I'm thinking. I'm still thinking, even if I doubt everything. So he said, oh, so once I remove everything and there's thinking still, then that must be me. So I think, therefore I am. But, so he called the thinking activity the ego himself. But obviously, that only happened because he started with I. I think, therefore I am. But if you had said there is thinking, you cannot come to the conclusion that I am this thinking. There's just the activity of thinking. But because of this reason, Sigmund Freud called thinking the ego. And then there's the superego. So here we talked about the id, that's the emotional activity, what we call the mood or the temperament. Then we talked about the ego, which is the thinking activity, and he said that the ego is dominated by the reality principle. The reality principle means that the thinking has the ability to see. It can be conscious of reality, of what is happening. The id was blind, emotions are blind, but the thinking can see. Has the ability to become conscious of reality, what is occurring. But then there's the superego. And he called the superego pretty much like the conscience, the sense of what is good and what is bad. So I always make this joke because I heard it from Bhante Punji. Here we took the 8 precepts and the 5 precepts, but then once we're going to go home, or before we go home, we're going to take the 5 precepts. But when we're driving home and someone cuts us off, they're going to make us angry. We might even wave our fist and say some mean words to them. But we took the 5 precepts. We said Musavada, Veramani, Sikapadam, Samadhi Yami. We're not going to use any harsh, mean, untruthful words. But when we go outside, the emotions flare up, they get triggered, and our thinking gets hijacked. And now that thinking that we had that we're going to follow the 5 precepts goes out the door. And so the superego is what is the sense of what is good and what is bad. And they say that the superego is constantly fighting with the id. So your sense of good and bad is always in conflict with your sense of pleasure and hatred. Your lust for pleasure and your lust for hatred. So think about it like this. The id is like a little kid. And the superego is like the parent. What do the kids want to do? They want to stay up all night, watch movies, be on their phone, eat ice cream. What is the job of the parent? No, that's not good. You can't stay up all night. No, you have to put away your phone at this time. It's not good to be on it all day. No, you can't eat ice cream. You have to eat vegetables and fruits. The superego is pretty much like the parent of this mental activity, and it's always fighting with the emotions. And then he said that the job of the ego, the thinking, is to bring harmony between the superego and the id, the emotions. But he thought that emotions were inherent. He thought that emotions were inherent in the human being. He thought that, the human being has the mechanisms in the brain and in the body to secrete hormones through the endocrine system. So it must be that the emotions are just, there's no way to get rid of them. They're part of you. So since you can't get rid of them, all we can do is try to keep them at bay, keep them under control. And when we do have to express the emotions, let's do it in a way that is okay for society. If you're angry at your boss who yelled at you or said that you did something wrong and that you're dumb, you can't punch your boss because he'll fire you. If your teacher tries to say something bad, you did a bad job, you don't know what you're talking about, you can't punch the teacher, you're going to get suspended. So Sigmund Freud's idea was, instead of releasing that energy, that emotional arousal, instead of expressing it, you have to express it in a socially acceptable way. Maybe you can go for a run, or you can go punch a heavy bag, But that's what his idea was, and it's called sublimation. But isn't it interesting? Because we were talking about the Kalama Sutta, and The Buddha, what did he say again? How do you know what truth is? Whether it's good, not bad, but good. Whether it brings happiness and it does not bring suffering. Whether it is wise and not unwise. So that whether it is good and not bad, that's the same thing that Sigmund Freud saw, which is called the superego, your sense of good and bad, the parent of the mental activity. And then whether it brings happiness, that's the id, the activity of the id, the emotion that always wants pleasure and constantly wants to get rid of pain. And then whether it is wise, that's correlated to your thinking. So the Buddha talked about 3 activities that we can point to. One is chitta. Chittas, normally when you read the sutras, you're just going to see it say the mind. And they also call mano, the mind. But the chitta is the mood, the place where the emotions can get aroused. Or if you remove the emotions, you can be tranquil. That's your mood. You can have a tranquil mood, or you can be emotional. That's the chitta. The mano is the thinking. What did the Buddha say in the first verse of the Dhammapada? Mano pupangama dhamma, mano seta mano maya. Thinking precedes experience. Thinking leads it. Thinking creates it. And then the Buddha also talked about a few different things. He talked about, so this is actually interesting. There was 4 different types of clinging or personalizing that the Buddha talked about. We call it, in Pali, we call it upadana. Upadana. So today for lunch we gave dana, right? We gave dana to the Bhantes and to the meditators. And dana means to give. Well, upa, we already said, upa means insight, take in. And dana is to give. So instead of giving, you're taking it in. You're taking it as yours. You're not giving, you're taking it as mine. And so upadana is a way of personalizing, making it mine. And the Buddha said there's 4 types of personalizing. There's Diti upadana, there's Kama upadana, there's Silabhata upadana, and then there's Attavada upadana. Thank you, Bhante. So the Diti upadana, Diti means thinking, your perspective of how you think about reality. Kama upadana is your lust for pleasure. You constantly personalize the chase, the lust for pleasure. The Sila Bhata upadana. Sila means not to do bad, and Bhata means to do good. So you personalize your sense of good and bad. And then, but those are the 3 things that Freud saw. So Freud was very smart. At least he saw these 3 activities. He saw that there is a mood that gets emotional and is constantly lusting after pleasure. He saw that there is a thinking activity that is trying to see reality. He saw that there's the superego, which is your sense of good and bad. But no other teacher, no other psychologist, no other religion has ever brought up that 4th upadana. Atta Vada upadana. Atta means self. Vada is your sense of self, the way of self, the sense of self. So everyone else in the world doesn't understand that they're personalizing a sense of self. They think they exist. They just see that as part of reality. Reality is existence. But the Buddha saw that that's just a way of personalizing. So here the Buddha, when he gave the advice to the Kalamas, you have to see, is it good or is it bad? You have to see, does it bring happiness or does it bring suffering? You have to see, is it wise or is it unwise? If it is good, if it brings happiness to yourself and others, and if it's wise, then do it. Take that up. Take that practice up and take it as truth. So here, that's how you bring harmony. Harmony to the mental activity. So when Freud was trying to figure out how do we solve this, oh, well, the ego has to stop the fighting between the superego and the id, between their sense of good and bad and the emotional arousal. The Buddha said, we have to perfect goodness, we have to perfect happiness, and we have to perfect wisdom. So when we think about the Buddha, a Buddha is the individual who evolved past the human state. Because the best they can do is reach a normal state of unhappiness. There's the abnormal state of unhappiness, and then there's a normal state of unhappiness. But a Buddha is the one who went past the human state and went to a super normal state of happiness. And Freud, his psychology, all the psychologists, when we go to therapy, they're just trying to get you from an abnormal amount of suffering to a normal amount of suffering. Yeah, there's death, yeah, there's sickness, yeah, there's old age, but we have to try to cope with it. That's the normal psychologist's perspective. But the Buddha is the supernormal psychologist. He wants you to understand, to see that you can remove all suffering and you can reach this supernormal state of happiness. And to do that, you have to evolve past the human being to the pinnacle of evolution, the Buddhahood. You have to become perfect in goodness, your sense of good and bad. You have to be perfect in happiness to reach a state where the mood becomes imperturbable. Imperturbable. There is a Pali word called akupa cheto vimutti. Akupa means imperturbable. Cheto is the mood. The mood that can be either emotional, shaking, or tranquil, peace. And vimutti is liberation. We can call it the imperturbable serenity of mind. So there are 4 ways that we can talk about Nibbāna. Nirvana is first, in the way that we evolve past the human state that suffers to a supernormal state of a Buddha, where there is no more suffering. Dukkha Nirodha, the cessation of all suffering. That's the first way of looking at Nirvana. The second way is looking at it from the citta perspective, the mood, where you remove all emotional disturbances and it becomes completely serene, completely tranquil. You actually are perfecting happiness. That's the second way. Then there's what we call sila. We can say sila, or we can say silabhata. That is the perfection of goodness. And then the last activity, which is the thinking, that is the perfection of wisdom. So these are the 4 ways: evolutionary perspective, the perfect goodness, perfect happiness, and perfect wisdom. When we think of the Buddha, we say he is the Buddha, the Tathagata, the Buddha is perfect in goodness, perfect in happiness, and perfect in wisdom. So how do we attain this perfection? What is the way we attain this perfection? The Buddha laid out the way that leads to this perfection, to this Nibbāna, to this goal, the goal of awakening, the goal of liberation, which is the Supernormal Eightfold Path. We normally call it the Noble Eightfold Path, but noble is for the word Arya. Arya is supposed to be different. We're supposed to distinguish Arya from the word Putujana. Putujana means the normal individual, the ordinary person. Well, an Arya means supernormal. If the normal individual is normal, then Arya is supernormal. So the Supernormal Eightfold Path. In the Supernormal Eightfold Path, you basically have the way to perfect goodness, to perfect happiness, and to perfect wisdom. And if you perfect those 3, then you reach this pinnacle of evolution. You attain Buddhahood. How do you perfect goodness? Well, in the Eightfold Path, you start out with Samadhi, the harmonious perspective. Here we're using harmonious for Sama. And the harmonious perspective is, you're an organism in the environment. You have these senses that can, when you see something, when you hear something, when you taste, when you touch, you always get a feeling, either a painful feeling or a pleasant feeling. And when you get a pleasant feeling, your emotion gets aroused that always wants that pleasant feeling. Not just now, but always. Let's keep it going. If it's a painful feeling, then you hate it. So because you're an organism and you have these senses, and the senses always trigger a feeling, pleasant or painful, and that feeling always triggers an emotion, whether lust for the pleasant or hate for the painful, then we have to realize that when we suffer, it's because we cannot accept reality. If we experience a pleasant feeling, but we can't keep it there forever, we suffer. Because the reality is that no pleasant feeling can last forever, anicca, impermanent. And then there's a painful feeling, we suffer because the emotion wants that painful feeling to leave. But sometimes you can't escape a painful feeling. The reality is that painful feelings will come up. So the suffering comes from the emotion being in conflict with the reality. And the thinking ability can see reality, but the emotion is blind. It just wants what it wants, like a crying baby that cannot understand. So that's the samadhi. So the emotion is causing the problem. It comes in conflict with reality, and this causes suffering. So the only thing I can do is do a 180 turn. Let's have a paradigm shift. That's what Dhamma, Chaka, Pavatana means. Dhamma, experience, Chaka, a wheel, and Pavatana is a revolution of the wheel. But what it's saying is to a revolution of your way of seeing reality from a way of seeing reality as an existence to a way of seeing reality as an experience. Because what is seeing? Seeing is an experience. What is hearing? Hearing is an experience. What is tasting? That's an experience. And so that's the samadhi. We do a 180 turn. We know that the emotions are the problem, so we're going to turn around. We're no longer are always going to be devoted to trying to satisfy the emotions. Now we're going to be devoted to eliminating the emotions. And our new goal is tranquility. And so samadhi leads to the sammasankappa, which is the harmonious orientation. Sammasankappa, now when we imagine what our goal is, because remember, humans are goal-oriented machines. We are constantly looking for goals and to solve the problems that lead to our goal. And our goal now is tranquility, it is letting go, it is compassion. So we have a new direction we're heading, and we are devoted, and we have a new value. We don't value gratifying the emotions anymore. We value going after what is going to lead to true cessation of all suffering, to true liberation. So then we start working on this perfection of goodness. The perfection of goodness starts with the sama vacha, sama kamanta, and sama ajiva. The harmonious way of speaking, the harmonious way of behaving, and the harmonious lifestyle overall. Because we have this new goal, because we are oriented in a new direction through a new value that we find worthy, we automatically start to transform and purify our behavior. And that will lead to the perfection of goodness. Then what happens, what's after the sama ajiva? Then comes sama vayama, sama sati, and sama samadhi. Sama vayama is the harmonious exercise. We know that through the senses, we experience pleasure and pain, and that pleasure and pain is going to trigger an emotion. It's going to trigger tanha. So in order to stop that triggering of tanha, we have to guard the senses. And then, even if we guard the senses, we don't pay attention to the things that cause pain and pleasure, because they're going to trigger emotions. If we don't pay attention to the senses, we still can remember past things. Oh yeah, my boss yesterday, he said that I did a bad job. Or yesterday this guy cut me off on the street. Or, man, I used to have this pleasure, now I don't have it anymore. So these are mental images. So the second step of samavayama First, we guard the senses. Then we have to eliminate this memory image and this image of the future pleasure, future good. And then, instead of thinking about the pleasant and painful feelings of sense experience or of memories of past sense experiences, then we have to generate good thoughts like metta, may all beings in this universe be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful. Like anapanasati, I'm breathing in and I'm breathing out because that feels relaxed. Both those thoughts don't trigger any emotions. And then if we can continue to think these good thoughts, it's going to naturally lead to happiness. We're going to go into samadhi, into samasati and samasamadhi. Because what is unhappiness? All unhappiness is because of emotional disturbances. All emotions are self-centered, and all emotions disturb the mind. And therefore, by practicing the sama-vayama, the samasati, paying attention to what's happening inside in the body, the feelings, the mood, and the thinking, that leads, if we keep that going, then no emotional thought can come up. And when there's no emotional thought that can come up to disturb the mind, then you naturally fall into jhana, into samasamadhi. You go into the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. And the fourth jhana, that's the perfection of happiness. There is no emotion that can come up. But why do we go into the fourth jhana? Why do we even try to go into samadhi? Why do we practice meditation? Because as human beings, we have the emotional part of the brain, because through evolution, that was part of the evolution. Emotions were what dominated the animals to try to stay alive. We still have that. We call it the limbic system in the brain. That's where the endocrine system secretes the hormones into the bloodstream. So we still have that as a human being. But we want to calm down. We want to think good thoughts. That's why we said earlier, sabba papasa akaranam kusalasa upasampada. Stop doing what is bad. Start cultivating what is good. And by this, sachita pariyo dapanan. This is how you purify the mind. And that's what samadhi is. You're purifying the mind from emotional disturbances. You're purifying the citta. The first perfection of goodness was purifying the sila. The perfection of happiness is purifying the citta. And that's what samadhi and sati and samavayama are supposed to do. That's how you perfect happiness. But we are trying to go into samadhi, we're trying to calm down the emotions, eliminate them so that we can think properly. We have these two types of meditation, which are really connected, samatha bhavana and vipassana bhavana. Samatha bhavana is to calm the mind, to calm the citta. Vipassana bhavana is to transform our understanding, transform our comprehension of reality, the way of thinking. That's the perfection of wisdom. And how do we perfect wisdom once we reach the sama samadhi, once we go into the fourth jhana? How do we attain this perfection of wisdom at that point? We have to look at how reality is created inside the organism. So the whole universe that you can look out as far into space, that is all happening inside the activity of the mind. There's a sutra called the Rohitassa Sutta, where this angel came to the Buddha and said, Bhante, when I was a human being, I had the ability to fly through the air as fast. I can go from one side of the earth to the other side in one stride. And for 100 years, I went into space looking for the end of the world, but never did I reach the end of the world. But I needed to reach the end of the world because I wanted to bring an end to suffering. And the Buddha said, you're correct. You do have to reach the end of the world to reach the end of suffering. But he said, but not through traveling in space will you be able to find the end of the world. Because the world the beginning of the world, the end of the world, and the way that leads to the end of the world is within this 6-foot-long organism. That's what he said. So, when we go into jhana, to the fourth jhana at the very least, we are trying to reach that last perfection, which is the perfection of wisdom. And for the perfection of wisdom is to see how we create this world. What is it that the Buddha saw to attain Buddhahood? He saw the Paticcasamuppada. Paticcasamuppada. Paticcasamuppada means he saw this simultaneous series of antecedents. An antecedent is an incident that has to come before another incident in order for that to occur. And so he saw we are organisms. And right from the bat, we are unconscious. And then the environment stimulates our senses. Electromagnetic waves stimulate the retina in the eye. Vibrations in the air stimulate the cochlea in the ear. Same with the nose. It has receptors that get triggered by chemicals. The tongue as well. So the Buddha saw that from an unconscious state, avijja, the organism gets stimulated through the senses. This is sankhara. Sankhara is a mental construction. So from unconsciousness, the mental activity starts creating. And then there's vijnana. So sankhara pacha vijnana. Vijnana is perception. So once the nervous system starts creating, then there's perception of what has been created. Perception of what has been created. And what is it that the nervous system creates? Through the senses, using sensations. It uses different sensations and feelings to create an image. So if we have a picture, if we have an artist draw a picture, paint it, what is he doing? It's just a white canvas, and he's just taking different colors. That's when we see light, we see color. That color is just different frequencies of light. That's all it is. And so when the painter takes different colors, which are different frequencies, which are different sensations, it puts them together, then all of a sudden we see a picture of a person, or a picture of the beach, a picture of whatever. All it is different colors that were put together to create a picture. So when the nervous system starts creating, it's creating a picture. And once it creates a picture, there's a perception of the picture, and then the perception gives that picture a name. That's what rupa is. Rupa is the picture, nama is the name. The perception is naming and identifying the picture with a name. But it's not just doing it from one sense, it's doing it from all the senses. From seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and thinking. So, nama rupa pacha salayatana. Salayatana is all 6 senses. Sala is for the 6, and ayatana is the senses, the way that we have sense experience. And the 6th sense is the thinking. So that means that when the ear gets stimulated, the eye gets stimulated, the nose, the tongue. When all 5 senses get stimulated, it sends signals up to the brain. And then the brain gets involved. And that is called pasa. Salayatana pacha paso. Pasa is cognition. Cognition means to interpret what it is that you are perceiving through the senses. That's what we call, every situation we can think of is the mind cognizing what it senses through what it perceives through the senses. But whenever it cognizes, like for example, in order to cognize this booklet here, you have to be able to see it. It has a color. You have to be able to touch it. If I touch it, it has a tactile sensation, and it also makes a noise. That's a noise. And then it has a smell. This is like a vegan leather, so it has a type of smell. You can even taste it if you wanted it, and it'll have a taste. So what it's doing to create this object, it's using all 6 senses to create an object in the mind. This book isn't here. There is no book. All there is the sensations that I cognize. That's all there is. This is what the Buddha meant when he said that the beginning of the world, the end of the world, and the way that leads to the end of the world is within your own organism. That's what he's saying. There is no object out here. All there is the sensations that are being cognized by the nervous system. So, but when you cognize the sensations, you create an object. And that object naturally will lead to a feeling, a good, a pleasant feeling, or a painful feeling. And what did we say happens when the painful or pleasant feeling is experienced? There is an emotional reaction. So that's why it says, Pasa Pacha Vedana. Vedana is feeling. Vedana Pacha Tanha. Tanha is the emotional reaction. And then it says, Tanha Pacha Upadana. Upadana is you personalize it. If I have a pen and I want to personalize the pen and I take it to Staples to personalize it, what are they going to do? They're going to write my name on it. That way when I take it to work, now this is my pen. This is Juan's pen. It has my name on it. Meaning I took it as mine. Me, myself, and mine. And so whenever there's an emotion, it naturally leads you to personalize that emotion. I am angry. I am sad. I am lustful, I am depressed, whatever the emotion is, you personalize it. But what happened? Up to this point, all I described was how experience occurs. There's a sensation, a sense organ gets stimulated by the environment, it gets translated as an electrochemical signal to the brain, perception then identifies the picture that was created by the nervous system and gives it a name. And it uses all six senses where this is happening to cognize an object that then derives a feeling, that then triggers an emotion, that then I personalize. Up to this point, there was no talk about a self or an other, self and other. There was no talk about that. But then it says, Upadana Pacha Bhavo. And Bhavo means Baba, existence. So it's saying that when you personalize something because of the emotional reaction, you think that you exist. And then, if we have to talk about existence, it's either existence means that there is an object occupying a space and time. And the only thing that we can point to that occupies space and time is the body. So we have to say that I am something that occupies space and time. All we can point to is the body. But now, because we think the body is myself, because we created the idea of self from the Vedana Pacha Tanha, Tanha Pacha Upadana, Upadana Pacha Bhavo, that interaction right there is what created the idea of the self existing. Before that, there was no idea of a self existing. But now that we created the self existing in our mind, which is a moha, delusion, now we think that this body is myself, and so the past of the body is my past, the present of the body is my present, and the future of the body is my future. That's how we get fooled into thinking because of the emotion and the personalizing. And what is the past of the body? The past of the body is birth. So we say Bhava Pacha Jati. Jati is birth. So because we think we exist, we think we were born. And then it says Jati Pacha Jara Marana. Jara Marana. So the present of the body, what is the present of the body? It is old age, aging process. So we're constantly getting older. Remember, we started this talk by saying that life is a building up process and a breaking down process. Metabolism. Once we get to like 25 or 30, the building up process starts to get weaker than the breaking down process. Sadhu, thank you so much. So once we start to get past 25, 30 years old, now the breaking down process starts to get stronger. So that's what we call old age or aging process. So that's what jara is. And then marana is death. So because we think we exist, we think we're going to get old, we think we're going to get sick, we think we're going to die, and that causes all the suffering in the world. So there was a sutra that Venerable Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha, the foremost in Dhamma knowledge behind the Buddha, he was asked, what is Nibbāna? And Venerable Sariputta said, Bhava Nirodho Nibbānam. Bhava Nirodho Nibbānam. The cessation of existence is Nibbāna. And so, once we see this Paticcasamuppada process, we see that the organism is constructing the idea of the self, the idea of the world, and the idea of suffering. Then we can no longer personalize this process. This is just an impersonal process that is happening without our knowledge. That's why it's called avijja, without our knowledge. So once we realize this, we can destroy the idea of existence. And that's what Venerable Sariputta called Nibbāna, the destruction of existence. Bhava Nirodho Nibbānam. So we can see that through this Supernormal Eightfold Path, we can not only reach perfect goodness through the practice of sila, perfect happiness through the practice of samatha or samadhi, and perfect wisdom through the practice of vipassana that leads to panya. And these are three activities within the mental activity: the sense of good and bad, the citta, which is the mood or temperament, the thinking activity, which is the mano. So perfection of goodness through sila, perfection of happiness through samadhi, and perfection of wisdom through vipassana in understanding this Paticcasamuppada process. And when you attain these three perfections of goodness, happiness, and wisdom, you reach the highest level of evolution, which is a Buddha. And I thought it was appropriate to discuss this and really step by step see how it's connected, especially on Vesak. And that's my talk. Thank you.
There is a good Dhamma talk. You covered so many areas, and also you talked about Paticcasamuppada, that is the day Buddha understood. Then anybody has any questions about his talk, or if you don't understand something, you would like to more elaborate?
Yes, if anyone has any questions, don't be shy. Feel free to ask. Does everyone understand? Everyone got an idea of what we were discussing? Good. Then you must all be very wise and very close to Nibbāna yourself then.
Thank you so much giving a nice Dhamma talk. And also by the power of this Dhamma teaching, may he live long, may he be well, happy and comfortable, and also may he be able to preach more Dhamma to the people. You can tell the people what is the teachings of the Buddha. That is, the Buddha said, that is the highest dana you can do. Okay, thank you so much. We are very happy to hear your Dhamma talk.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you.